My name is Norm Walsh. I'm from Saxonica, and this afternoon I'm going to give a short update on the status of the QT4 activity. Before I begin, my apologies for not being able to be there in person this year, hoping for next year. QT4CG is the informal name for the W3C XSLT Extensions Community Group. It has a community group page, weekly meetings with agendas and minutes. We have a website which links to all of these things. There's a mailing list with archives. There's a GitHub repository where we maintain working drafts and manage issues and pull requests. And there is a channel dedicated to this work on the xml.com Slack. Coincidentally, we will have had 52 meetings just before Declarative Amsterdam, assuming things go as planned after this is recorded. That's one calendar year of meetings spread over a bit more than a calendar year of actual time. The 3.0, 3.1 specifications were published in 2017, and not long after that, there were discussions about extensions that people would like to see added, features that users wished had made it into the cut for 3.0 and didn't. By 2020, the extensions working community group, had been formed, and we began regular meetings in 2022. The W3C activity that sponsored the work originally has been discontinued, but user requirements continue to evolve. Other technologies related in related spaces continue to evolve. No family of specifications as large as QT has ever finished. In addition, programming language design continues to evolve, and some of the work that's been done recently in particular has been to add support for popular features to our suite of specifications. The current regular participants in our weekly meetings are listed here, but there are additional participants who write issues and comments on issues, who participate in discussions on the mailing list, who chat with us in Slack, etc. Everyone is invited. There are more new things in 4.0 than I could possibly enumerate in 15 minutes, even if I did nothing but list the titles. There's a change log at the end of every specification, and that's a good place to go to see what's new. Those are usually mostly up to date. I've cherry-picked a handful of things here that I thought would be of interest. No offense intended if I've left out your favorite feature or new syntactic construct. I couldn't list them all, literally, in the amount of time that I have. I've also mixed them up in a kind of a random order to keep it interesting. And Christian Grun gave a very similar status update in the open mic session at Balisage this year. I've tried to pick some different things so that this isn't just a reprise of that presentation. First up are optional and keyword arguments to functions. XSLT and XQuery have had functions for a long time, and different functionalities have been possible, but two popular missing features were default values, which allow you to leave some of the arguments out, and keyword arguments. So here we see a simple function that defines a point with x and y coordinates, and I've provided default values for both x and y. That means if I call the point function with no arguments at all, I get 0 for both of them. If I call it with a single positional argument, that becomes the x value, and the y value takes on its default value. And finally, I can explicitly specify the keyword arguments by specifying y equals 2 in the function call. Next up, a simple syntactic convenience when writing node and axis step tests. If you've got lots of tests and they use the same predicate, they use the same step, you can now group the names rather than having to repeat the step or node name tests every time. Also new is string interpolation with the new backtick quote marks. So XPath already includes functions and operators to construct string values, but lots of folks have found string interpolation to be convenient. I believe backticks are also the standard in JavaScript. A slightly more complicated new feature is the mapping arrow operator. If you're familiar with the current mapping operator, that takes a expression and applies a function to that expression using the expression value as the first argument of the function, but that groups them all together. The new operator applies that function to each element in the sequence. Think of it as the union of the arrow operator and the exclamation mark operator. And these can be mixed together. So here we have an absurd example. This is November, which we are going to tokenize, and then we are going to concatenate a period onto the end of each of those tokens, and then we're going to uppercase each of those tokens. And then we're going to concatenate all those tokens together by going back to the original mapping operator, and that returns the string you see there on the screen. So slightly more complicated, but very useful. In XSLT, we have new attribute forms for simplifying conditional expressions. You can use then and else on XSLIF, and similarly, you can use select on when and otherwise. So if you're returning simple atomic values or expressions of atomic values, then this is considerably shorter and simpler. We've also added an XSL switch instruction, a kind of syntactic sugar on top of a choose. You can use it with single values as a lookup table, the way you would in other programming languages, but you can also provide a list of values in the test, and it will test for equality against each of those. So this example would presumably print there are 30 days in this month, given that it's November. Also in XSLT, we have enclosing modes. If you've ever written style sheets that use a large number of modes, you may have had the experience of not necessarily being able to find all of them, or of forgetting to put the mode attribute on one of them, or of forgetting to use the appropriate mode when you're making a call. Many of those problems are now solved by having an XSL mode that it contains the templates. This has the effect of making all the templates be in that mode. It also provides some error checking. If you use this method of defining templates in a mode, for example, you're not allowed to have templates in that mode defined elsewhere. So you can be sure that you've grouped them all together. There are some slightly more complicated rules around packages that I won't try and get into now. This is one that comes up with alarming regularity. The RFC for JSON says that forward slashes in string values should be escaped, and consequently, the serialization specification defines the JSON serialization as performing that escaping, which leads to things like you see in the middle of the screen there, and the musical notes representing the sad trombone, because nobody actually likes this result. I'm pleased to say there's a new output option, escape solidus, that allows you to specify whether you want this particular bit of escaping to be done, and if you say false, then you don't get escaped forward slashes. A nice easy one, if you want to specify an optional value with a default, instead of specifying it by a complicated if exists then else expression, you can now simply use the new otherwise operator. We've also generalized the context item to a context value. We've introduced braced conditionals, which allow you to have an optional else clause. There's some abbreviated function syntax, which combined with the ability to write arity1 focus functions is very convenient in some higher order function situations. There's a new compact syntax for looking up in maps, and. There are gobs and gobs of new things that are also coming in the 4.0 specs. There are functions. There are lots of functions, and there are going to be lots more functions, I expect. In fact, there are so many functions. We've started having conversations about how to group functions, because having them all in one namespace is a good and or a bad thing. I'm not even going to attempt to explain what any of those are. They're all new. What else is possible? There have been some discussions about having extensions to do flower expressions over maps and arrays in a more convenient way. Having variadic function parameters, that is, functions that take an arbitrary number of parameters grouped together into a sequence or a map or an array, presumably. Destructuring assignments, improved map and array navigation. We occasionally talk about having a set data type. There are currently 171 open issues and or feature requests for things still being discussed and decided. When are we going to be done? I don't know. That burn down chart, and I use the word down somewhat hesitantly, is the current open issues as it has evolved over time. And you can see the trajectory is still very much up and to the right, whereas for a finished spec, you'd kind of like it to be pointed the other way and heading towards zero, which it definitely isn't. Doesn't mean we're not going to be finished until we resolve all of those issues. At some point, we may decide to move some of them to a vNext category or admit defeat and close them without resolving them. We're not going to be finished this year, obviously. I would be surprised if we were finished next year. I think the group has expressed a desire not to spend 10 years doing this, so maybe by 2025 we'll be in a mood to start closing things down. But it's hard to say. Working groups continue to work until the members of the group get tired of working and then want to finish. So hopefully we'll be able to tie a bow on it in the not too distant future. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much. I've included links here to the pages again, and I'll put these slides up somewhere. I'd like to especially thank everyone in the community group and in the wider community who are devoting their valuable time and energy to writing specifications and reviewing specifications and testing specifications and writing and testing implementations. The effort wouldn't have any value if no one was implementing it or using it. And so thank you very much. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Norm. Anybody with a question for Norm? Because he's online. Sid Bauman is also online.
Thank you very much, Norm. I appreciate this because I haven't been following QT4 very closely. Two questions. The first is very general and very important, I think, and the second is picayune and perhaps interesting to somebody else. I don't know. Does the existence of, if and when the QT4 specs are finished, does that increase or decrease the likelihood of more and better implementations in the world?
I think it increases the likelihood that there'll be implementations in the world. Saxonica is working on them. BaseX is working on them. I believe we have a couple of other implementers who don't participate in the calls regularly, but turn up on the list occasionally. So I expect large portions of it to be implemented on the day it's finished.
Right. So I may have misphrased that. I don't mean more implementations. Will there be implementations of this? I mean, will there be more implementations of XPath in general because these specs exist, or will there be fewer because, I mean, will there be developers who go out and say, oh, this is a decent thing I can implement, and so we get a new implementation of XPath because they can implement X4?
That's a much harder question to answer. We're making the thing bigger and more complicated and harder to implement in terms of just the amount of stuff you have to implement to claim conformance. So in that case, perhaps we're making it harder. At the same time, we are clearly making it easier to use and easier for developers to use. And if that means more developers want to use it, that will put pressure on people to implement it. So I'm not sure that 4.0 is going to make a profound difference one way or the other, but I hope we get more implementations.
Me too. And if there are no other questions pending, Peter?
Well, there are.
So I'll hold on.
John Lumley?
No, it was actually Norm answered what I was going to ask.
Excellent. Adam Ritter here.
volunteering to help, I hope.
Yeah, it's, well, as you know, unfortunately, it's scheduled at a time I can't attend the community groups. But fascinating and impressive work from the community group, I think, firstly. So thank you very much. Secondly, just a thought, I say this carefully. When we were designing XQuery 1 and then XQuery 3, as it was, having subsequently used them for some time afterwards, it's perhaps obvious that there are some things that could have needed a little bit more refinement, shall we say, for use in the real world when we're actually building applications. Is there any sort of user feedback period envisaged for this after the standard is kind of almost finalized? So what I mean is, you know, you sort of get to a point, you say, right, this is going to be the standard, this is our release candidate. Now we're going to allow, I don't know, 6 months or so for feedback from people that are actually using it to build things, and then adjust from there. Is there any sort of cool down period envisaged?
We haven't. The point at which we think we're done is so far over the horizon that I don't think we've had those conversations yet. I think it's a really good idea. I think, oh my goodness, I'm up on the big screen. I think that it would be a good idea. I think it would be a useful exercise. The community group process doesn't publish official working recommendations and things. So I don't know exactly what the end game is going to look like, but I think it's a good idea. And we have, as I said before, we have a couple of implementations already that you can get and play with. So I would hope that folks who are interested in developing these applications will actually try to play with them as we go along, because as I'm sure you're aware, a working group that starts designing something and gets feedback is likely to be willing to change it. If you wait till it's done and then you come back and say, I'd like you to change it, it's more difficult. There's more inertia in the group to not make those changes. There are more folks who have implemented it, et cetera. So it's a difficult act to wrangle, but point taken. We should give users a chance to try it out in order to avoid those sorts of issues.
Thanks, Norm. Much appreciated.
Now I have a question to the implementers. We know that Saxonica and BaseX have started implementing the drafts, but I see an XPath implementation here, and I see people from XSDB. Can I ask Martin Middle if there are any plans yet to work on the 4.0?
That was actually something I wanted to ask. I know in the JavaScript community, you have a few stages where a proposer can go through. Stage 0, where it's really unknown, and stage 3, 4, whatever, when it's known that it's gonna be like that in the standard. My time is kind of precious, so I don't want to implement something that's just an experiment yet. I would really like to implement something that I'm kind of 99.9% sure that it's gonna be in the spec. Is there some list of that already, that I know this is gonna be there, I can safely implement it, and I know it's not gonna be reverted? Yeah.
I believe that we have now resolved all of the parts of the spec that we felt needed group consensus. There had been some work on the spec before the community group formed, and so there were some things in the spec that the group had never reviewed. I believe we have now reviewed all of those and either backed them out in some cases or accepted them. So I believe that the current working drafts reflect the status quo of the people who show up every week. And that isn't a guarantee that it won't change or that something won't be removed. But I think the things that get into the specs now are reasonably stable, especially if you avoid the things that went in, last week. But working groups, they're their own thing. They can change their minds and make changes, but nobody's making them randomly, as far as I can tell.
Cool. Then I'll start to work on XPath 4.0 at some point next week-ish or something.
Fabulous.
One last question from John Lumley.
It's worthwhile remarking that some of the, particularly in XSLT, some of the constructs actually can be pre-processed from XSLT 4 into 3 and some of the stuff, some of the XPath stuff is already supported in things like part of it in Saxon. So it is actually possible to start experimenting with those now. I've actually used some of my stuff at the moment. I'm writing it in 4 and I'm pre-compiling it into 3 and then compiling it through Saxon to do some of my experiments. So there is an ability to do a certain amount to for example, the enclosed modes is quite easy to experiment with and actually use it in something quite serious. That's it.
Thank you, John.
Norm, thank you and your committee for all their work so far.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to everybody, and I do hope to see you in person next year. Ciao.